I recently built this computer desk for my son. It's 7 feet wide, but my son finds the space limiting. The reason? This printer takes too much space and he doesn't have file storage. So today we are going to fix that. I would have run to Home Depot and got some plywood to start working on it. But our area was going through a big snowstorm that filled our area with almost 2 feet of snow. So I had to come up with some alternate solution. I looked in the garage and we didn't have any plywood. The only thing we had this cabinet panel that was left in my neighbor's garage for 5 years till I emotionally blackmailed to have them gift it to me. I thought we can reuse it. It's a 1/2 inch maple plywood along with an additional 1/4 inch plywood that is stained to match the cabinet colors. We decided to cut it to the size, but for that purpose we had to use jigsaw as the panel was not smooth and had a trim attached on the one side. Once we cut it to the size, we took it to the table saw to rip it to the proper width. We thought removing the 1/4 inch panel would be easy, but we were wrong. It took us a while to take it out and the result was not what we expected. The top layer of the plywood was peeled off, but we still decided to use it as we didn't have any other option, so we sanded it smoothly. This would serve as the 2 side pieces for the carcass. For top and bottom rails, we used some leftover 1/2 inch plywood and trimmed those 2 sizes on our miter sled. We built this sled recently and it's using a 1/4 inch plywood for the base. It's really light and it was perfect for this particular job. Not sure if you're noticing, I'm using a 3/4 inch piece of maple as a spacer while using my table saw fence as a stop block. For joinery, we decide to use pocket hole. Here we are using the correct pocket hole jig in our vice clamp to make it easy to hold it tight against the piece. This process was repeated for all 4 supporting pieces, 2 for the top and 2 for the bottom. Once the support pieces were ready, we used some glue and clamps to put this together. This is where the square precision clamps would have been useful, but we didn't have any. So we used a leftover rectangular piece of wood and some help from my son to make it work. I think it worked out fine, but I'm also thinking of ordering some of those clamps for the next project. If you have linked to the ones that you like, please share those in the comments, as that's something we would love to try it out. For attaching the support brackets that would be on the lower side of the carcass, they had to be sitting approximately 2 inches from the ground. We tried installing it upside down, then on the side, and finally flipping it to the proper position and using some spacer block before screwing it tight with the Craig screws. Once the support pieces were attached, we left the glue dry while putting some clamps to hold the pieces tight. This completes our first step of making the carcass. You remember the 1/4 inch panel that we ripped out from the plywood? Here we are ripping that to size because we will be using that for the back support piece. I know, this is a Frankenstein type of side table, but believe me, the end result is reasonable and I'm sure you will like it. When it came to drawers, we had the similar problem of not having enough plywood. So we used some leftover cedar or pine shelves, we don't know, but these were 9.5 inch wide boards that we had laying around from some years back. We ripped those to the proper width, which is 4.5 inch and 6.5 inch. That was the height of the drawers that we decided to make. After that, we cut them to sizes of around 14 inch deep and 14 inch wide. We again used our sled for this purpose. A miter sled is super useful when it comes down to cutting the pieces to this exact same width, which in this particular case we needed. Once all the pieces were cut to length, we took them to our jointer planer combo. We first planed one side on the jointer and then ran all the pieces through the thicknesser till they were all flat. If you have been watching our videos in the past, you must have seen that we were not able to use our thickness planer along with the dust collector in the past. But that is no longer the case as we recently installed the 220 volt dedicated outlet. So now we can use our thickness planer as well as the dust collector together. Once all the pieces were planed to consistent thickness, we took them to the miter saw for the exact final width. But wait, didn't I do that on the miter sled? I did, but we left it a little bit longer to account for snipes. So here we are actually really putting them on proper size. For the bottom support, we put the grooves on our table saw. We ran it once and then checked for the exact thickness of our bottom panel and then ran it twice. And this gives the proper fit for the bottom panel. We repeated this process for all the pieces. We also cut the back pieces completely to have space for sliding the panel, as you see here. For attaching the drawers together, we decided not to use any fastener. In the past, we have used 2-inch nails in addition to the glue, but in this particular case, we simply used glue and left them to dry. My son wanted it this way, and we'll have to wait and see to see if the strength is something that we have to worry about. But I have no doubt that they will be fine. What do you think? Do you think they will be strong enough? Let us know in the comments. While you're thinking about it, it's a good time to also consider subscribing to the channel. We are weekend warriors who have picked all the skills through YouTube, and we really hope to share it in a friendly family environment through our channel. So if you like the content that we produce, please do help by subscribing to the channel. Coming back to the drawer boxes. So once the 4.5-inch boxes were done, we repeated the process for our taller boxes, which are 6.5 inch. We repeated the process of gluing the pieces together and then putting this top panel, or I should say bottom panel. For attaching the face frames, we took some 3/4 inch maple and ribbed them to the proper thickness. In our case, the plywood was 1/2 inch wide, but we kept these pieces a little bit bigger so that we can later trim it out with our flush trim router bit. For the top and bottom, we use approximately 1.5 inch pieces. And for center, it was approximately 2 to 2.5 inch wide piece. Once we were happy with the look, we trimmed the side pieces to the proper height. The remaining part was just gluing them together. For attaching this frame, we installed it in place using some glue. There were no fastener used, and we just left the pieces dry using some clamps. Again, the Dad and Son DIY team worked together to make this happen. It was definitely not something that one person cannot do, but just having my son around made it much more easier and fun. My son was definitely excited about this project, as this was something that he was looking forward to use, and he also decided the sizing based on his needs. We first glued the side and the top and bottom pieces, and then finally, once that glue was dried, we put the centerpiece. This just made it easier and ensured a tight fit. Once the glue dried, we verified the drawers to be of proper size and fit well within the spacing. Now for the finishing part, and this is the part that I generally enjoy the most, as this is where we get to start with rough lumber and put them to the final finished product, and I get to use my Inca jointer planer that I always find fun to use. So here you are seeing us running the maple through the planer. We didn't have to use the jointer as the boards were pretty flat, and we just wanted them to be cleaned up using the planer. Once all the boards went through the planer and had consistent thickness, we trimmed them to the size on our miter saw. This was still rough sizing right now, as we will be giving the finished width after the glue up. The pieces were wide enough for the top drawer front, but not for the bottom and for the tabletop. For this purpose, we had to glue up the pieces, and here we are jointing one of the edges so that we can glue them up. Once one of the edges were jointed, we took it to the table saw to clean up the other edge. For aligning the pieces together, we decided to use biscuit joiner. I don't think this was necessary, but as we had this and we used it only for one project in the past, we wanted to use it. The biscuit joiner definitely helps align the pieces together and helps with the glue up. Here we are using total of 3 pieces for the tabletop. Once a liberal amount of glue was applied on these edges, we put these pieces together using these parallel clamps. Parallel clamps are really useful when doing these kind of glue ups, and we acquired them during our last project, and since then we find multiple uses of those. Here you see the final pieces. The right one is the top drawer piece, the center piece is the bottom drawer piece, and then the tabletop. Now for the final sizes. Here we are ripping those pieces for the exact height of the drawer pieces. Once the pieces were ripped to the proper height, we took them to the miter slit for the proper width. Here you see us trimming those to the proper width. There was some tear out as we were using a ripping blade, but it didn't matter as these pieces will get a round over and a 45-degree chamfer. Tabletop, it didn't fit in the miter slit, so we used another slit that we had built before, which was open from one side, and we used that for putting the tabletop to the proper width. For installing the drawers, we are using this full extension side mounted drawer slides. They are exactly half-inch thick, so for each drawer you need extra 1-inch space between the drawers and the box. The slides were mounted with half-inch screws. We repeated the process for the bottom glides as well. It was a bit easier for bottom as we had the support pieces that the slides can just sit on. The drawers were a bit tight on the sides, which we were able to fix with a little bit of sanding. For attaching the boxes with the glides, we extended the glides on the side, used some sandpaper for the spacing, and then aligned the boxes and the glides together and then just screwed them up. The side table is coming together, but we need to put the drawer fronts. I gave a little bit of sanding just for the surface and then took the pieces onto the router for the round over. We first smoothened all the edges using 1/8 round over bit. Here we are using the Cowood router bit we have been using for a while and been super happy with the quality. I'll leave the link to the product in the description. Once the round over was done, we gave the 45-degree chamfer for the drawer fronts and the tabletop. Finally, we used the flush trim bit to make the face frame perfectly aligned to the box. Now the pieces are ready for the final sanding. This is the step that I generally leave up to my son. He has much more patience than I do for sanding and making the pieces perfect. He went through all the grids of the sandpaper, starting from 80 all the way up to 320, and hand sanding the edges. Before the final finish, we attached the drawer fronts and the tabletop using some screws. We wanted to do it to make sure it's a perfect fit and then taking it out and then give the final finish. We attached the top using 4 screws running through the support brackets that we used to put the box together. For attaching the fronts, we used the same mechanism by first pre-drilling and then using some screws. We then repeated the process for the bottom drawer as well. In this particular case, I held the face frame on one side while my son drilled and attached the screws from the other sides. For bottom drawer, as the drawer fronts were quite big and heavy, we decided to use 2 extra screws to give it proper strength. For the final finish, we used arm and seal. This is what we used for our computer desk, which we do not have a video, but we were super happy with the final finish. It's super easy to apply, where you put on the finish and wipe the excess off, and you repeat it 2 or 3 times to give it a proper protection. Once the finish dried, we put those pieces together by installing the top using screws and then attaching the drawer fronts. As we had taken the slides out for the final finish, here we are putting them back. We also used this opportunity to put our branding on the sides using a branding iron that we recently got. It made the product look a lot more professional than they are. Here you see my son doing the touch-up, as he's really perfectionist when it comes down to finishes. The final step was to close the side table using the back piece. Remember the panel that we ripped out from the plywood? This is that same piece. He sanded it and finished it, and it looks perfect. You remember the promise I made that the final product will look good? What do you think of it? Does it meet your bar? I'm happy with how the side table turned out to be, but helping it keeping the computer desk clean? I'm not so sure about it. If you like the video, please leave your thoughts in the comments. Also, as again, we appreciate you staying with us, and I hope to see you again in the next video.